Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another video right here on Free Will Photos. Today, we're going to be editing a portrait that I photographed at Imaging USA of a fantastic model named Brooklyn. Now, I'm using Luminar Neo today, and while I was at Imaging USA, I got to meet with the Luminar team and kind of talk over Luminar and things of that sort. This is a tool that I use. I don't showcase it as much on the channel, but they are offering a 30% off exclusive discount. The link is down in the description box below. So if you want to pick up Luminar Neo and you want to save a little bit of money, consider using that discount code or that link that'll lead to the discount down in the description box. Now let's jump into the computer and get to editing so that way you can kind of see the power of Luminar Neo if you're not familiar with it. So here we are inside of the computer. I realize that the light is not the greatest on me, but we'll make do. Now, I am using this program as a standalone today because I think that's how many people would use it. But just know that this does have a plug-in capability and you don't pay extra for it. When you purchase this software, either as a standalone license, perpetual license, or subscription, you get this software as a plugin. It just comes with the package. All right. Now, with that being said, we're going to edit a portrait because that's kind of the work that I do a lot of. And as I mentioned before, this is a model by the name of Brooklyn. She was at Imaging USA. I got to use the 24 to 105 f2.8 Canon lens. And that thing is really light. And I really enjoy what I get out of camera with it. This was shot on a R6 Mark II, but really that doesn't matter as much for what we're going to be doing today. So when you are in the catalog, all you have to do, because I already did it, all you have to do is click on the image and then hit edit. It brings you into the editing module. And this program is really, really snappy. So I really enjoy working inside of it, especially working with portraits. Now, the first thing that I want to do on a raw image is develop the exposure. And I do want to be very clear that if you choose any of these other tools that are located inside of Luminar, you'll end up losing the develop raw aspect, at least on the tools page. So this is my recommendation. If you are working with a raw image inside of Luminar, as soon as you open your image in edit, just come over to the edit section. You have develop raw right here. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and get a pretty good exposure, which out of camera, I think it was exposed well. What I'm not a fan of is this hot spot on her forehead. So we're just going to pull down on the highlights a touch and maybe pull down on the overall exposure. Because if you know me, you know I like contrasty images. This was a brighter scene, so I don't want to contrast it too much. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up on my contrast, but I want to be careful that using smart contrast, I really enjoy that slider inside of Luminar. Here's where we came from and where we are so far, and we still got some room to go. Now, her hair has a lot of detail or definition in it. So what I want to do is actually pull up on the shadows here. And I'm going to pull up just a touch here. And it does take a minute for Luminar to render the adjustments. So you kind of have to make micro adjustments, let it go, let Luminar render it, and then it'll show up in your preview here. And then you do some befores and after just to make sure that you're not over baking the photo. The goal is not to make your photo look unrealistic. The goal is to retouch it and make people believe that it was never retouched to begin with. So that is my overall goal with all of my edits of people, at least, unless I'm doing something crazy. Now, with that being said, I do think that the colors are a little washed out on the day. I do think that there was way more saturation, and raw files just tend to be a little less saturated than a JPEG. So I'm just going to bump the saturation a touch here. Think about 5 points works on this particular image. When you're working on your own portraits, make sure that you pay attention to what looks good for yours. You don't want to do something like that. That's no bueno. All right. So I think somewhere around 4 or 5 works well. Now, one of the more forgiving sliders in most editing software, but definitely inside of Luminar, is the vibrance slider. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull up on my vibrance. And you can push this a little bit more than you can the saturation. I don't have like some magic ratio between saturation and vibrance. It's all to taste and by my eye. Now, if I was working on a series of photos for an individual, then and I know that my settings in camera were shot the same, then this would probably be like my baseline adjustment. And then I would synchronize this across all of the images as a style, and then tweak it little by little and have to go back and look at the entire series of photos to make sure that one isn't more saturated than the other or more vibrant than the other. But today I'm only working on one image, so it's not going to be compared to any of the other ones, and that's okay. So we're just going to go ahead and push the vibrance a little bit because I want this to be a more colorful image. The background is pretty dull, but Brooklyn is full of color, and we want to make sure that that actually pops. She's wearing this pink blazer. And then, we'll get the color of her lips to pop here a little bit. And we'll also bring out some of the color in her skin because the light is kind of washing her out there. All right. So now that we have our general color overall in the image, right? And I think I shot the white balance pretty fine. I was on auto white balance, and I think it did a good job using continuous light. It kind of works here. All right. So now what I want to do, we'll close down the color, open up sharpness, and we're going to push the sharpen just a touch here. And the reason with raw images, your photos usually are not very sharp out of camera. So you want to put a little bit of sharpness, but you don't need to overbake it. I find that the radius at 50 and masking at 35 works pretty well. So I don't really need to touch that for my generic or my initial edit, or my global edit, if you will. And then we'll come down to optics. Now, remember, I was using a new lens that hasn't been released yet, the 24-105 RF Canon f2.8. I probably said that all jacked up. Anyway, that lens, there aren't any profile corrections available for it. However, what you can do is come down to optics and hit auto distortion correction and see if you like what Luminar gives you. All right. I think I'm okay with this because it makes her look larger in the frame, and that's what I'm going for. This is, just a great headshot portrait, if you will, of Brooklyn here. And I just wanted to make sure that I got, her a little bit larger in the frame. And I feel like there's a little bit of pin cushion distortion, which is when the lens pushes into the frame. And this is just correcting that, bringing her more onto the focal plane. Don't worry about that if you aren't overly confident in what that is. Don't worry about it. You check the button, and if you like it, great. If you don't, uncheck it. Then we have auto defringe, and I don't think I have any fringing going on in this image, even though Luminar seems to be doing something. I don't think I have it, but since Luminar looks like it did something, because if I turn this off, and then you see how it goes a little blurry, and then it'll come back into focus. So all of that, I think that it's fine. I'm going to leave auto defringe on, even though I'm not quite confident that it's doing something. All right. Now, that's where I would stop with the develop, because now I have a really good base. Here's what we came into Luminar with, and here's where we are right now. The photo is overall more vibrant. It's more colorful. It is lit the way that I would like to start working to craft my overall portrait. And I think that we're good to go. I didn't change the default profile or the camera profile. I just used the Luminar profile. But again, you can come through here and you could choose one like camera faithful and neutral. It pushes the reds too much in my favor, or in my opinion. Yeah, and then camera portrait probably won't Yeah, it's just pushing the reds a whole lot. And Canon is, I guess, known for doing that. I like Luminar default on this particular image, so that's what I'm going to roll with. Once you have that, you can close that out, come back to tools. Now, if you see develop raw over here, that means when you click on this, you're going to get all of your raw adjustments. So you don't mess up your image. I highly recommend that you come and you add in maybe a little bit of structure AI. All right. And I say just a little bit. Watch what happens to develop raw when I drag this slider to the left or the right. So if I push this over to the right, develop raw goes away. And now whenever I click on develop, I can do all of my local adjustments the way that I would like to do it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close structure AI, which I'm okay with adding a little bit of structure AI. It's a nuance. I would like to see that kind of work, but it's okay. We make things happen, right? That's what we do here on this channel. We make stuff happen. So now that I have my develop module, notice that they're all reset to 0 as opposed to my raw developments. Now, if I wanted to go back and make changes to my raw developments, I can do so by clicking on edit, and then you can see where it says raw edits. Develop raw is still available. I can come in here, modify all of my raw settings. So I didn't lose those. They're just not visible to me at first glance. All right. And that is a new thing because I can run multiple instances of any of these tools. So now what I want to do is probably start working on sculpting the light in her face. And I'm going to move through this a little bit faster now. I just want to kind of showcase what you can do inside of Luminar. And if you have questions specifically about, hey, how do you edit portraits in Luminar, then please drop a comment down below and I will be more than happy to make a tutorial specifically about that. So we're going to go ahead and bump some exposure. And I know that I reduced the exposure earlier, but right now what we're looking at is the hair. I want to start crafting the hair. So I'm going to open up some shadows, and this is going to bring back some of that detail in her hair over here. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the blacks or to the black and whites. I'm going to pull down on the black point here. And what that's going to do is help make her hair look a little bit more rich. And I like that. So here is what we started off with, and then where we are now as far as the exposure settings. All right. The next thing that I'll probably do, forgot to do this earlier, but I'll contrast this just a touch. It doesn't really need it all that much, but I'm going to do it anyway. All right. So now what we'll do is click on masking. And I like to use the brush. All right. Everyone does what they do, however they do it. I personally like using the brush. I feel the most comfortable with it. You can use the AI masking, but this is going to select the entire person, and I only want to work with the hair. All right. So I'm going to use the brush, and using my bracket keys, I'm just making my brush size a little bit larger and smaller. And I'm just going to loosely paint over the hair because for this particular edit, it doesn't need to be the most precise. What we're doing is really just trying to open up the shadows in the hair. And I only want this particular effect to go onto the hair. All right. So we'll go like so, and then turn this off and on, and you can see it's pretty subtle. So I'm going to make it like crazy over the top just for YouTube purposes. But for me and what I'm seeing on my screen, this is actually doing the trick of what I want to do. But if I wanted to, I can just increase the shadows here, and you can really see the difference now that this is only going into the hair. And these are what we call local adjustments. Now I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit, contrast that, and then I'll probably go and pull down on my black point again, just to make it a little bit darker, because I do like her hair to be dark, but I wanted to get that definition in there. And you know what? We might even try something with the highlights here, because there are some highlights going throughout her hair. So maybe something like that. All right. let's take a look at the before and after of what we just did with the hair. And I like what we got going on here. Okay, so I'm going to let that be. And once you have finished with a tool, all you have to do is click the top part here. It closes and it jumps over to this edit section. Now, I have the structure AI. Remember, I use that just to get the develop AI to, or I'm sorry, develop raw to come over to the edit section. And then I have the develop section that I just did, and you can see all of the adjustments here. And if you're like, okay, I'm not quite sure what that's doing, what you can do is click on masking, click on more actions, and then you can click on show. And it's going to show you the mask. I would like to have Luminar be able to rename, like if we could rename these and I could just type in hair, it would make it a lot easier for me to follow my edits, but that's okay. It's not available yet. I have hopes that it will come. Luminar, please add that. All right. So now it's time to work on her face. And again, I have this hot spot right here. So I'm going to address that first. I personally like to remove highlighted areas of a face whenever I'm working on them because those are more distracting, I think. And I want the attention to eventually come to her eyes. So I have ways of making that happen. But we're going to go ahead and use develop again. And this time I'm going to go right into masking. I could use a brush tool, but I want to be a little bit more precise with the fall off of this particular edit. So I'm going to use a radial gradient. This is no different than what I would do in any other software. So, you know, don't think that this is exclusive to Luminar. This is just my editing style. And hopefully this is one of those beautiful things or moments where you're learning that if you learn just basic editing styles and techniques, you can almost adapt them to any software. So if there is a program where you're like, you know what, I really want to try that program out. If you learn just basic editing techniques or, you know, universal techniques, you'll be able to adapt those to pretty much any software that allows you to do the same thing. So you'll feel comfortable no matter where you go, as long as you find that aspect. Hopefully that made sense. Now, I have my radial gradient. It's in that hot spot. It's falling off. We'll see if that falls off well. Now, the downside to using Luminar is once you have made your mask, as soon as I click off of the mask and I go back to the adjustments, I cannot come back and re-edit this. I would like Luminar to allow us to come back to re-edit our radial gradients, and I believe it's the same with the linear gradients as well. But for whatever reason, we can't, and I'm not sure why that is. So that's why I took a little bit more time to get more precise. Normally, I just slap those things on, and then I go and edit, but for whatever reason, Luminar doesn't allow us to come back to edit those. So hopefully that'll get updated as well. All right. Now, what I'm going to do is pull down on the exposure here. All right. And that's going to bring back some of that detail and definition. And I didn't need to do it a whole lot because, look, the natural look of the image, she was leaning up towards the light as it was coming in from the upper right of the frame, and it was shining down. And she was fairly close to it. So the light fall off is going to happen a little bit more gradual, right? Just the way that light works. However, she was directing her face right towards the light, and she's going to get the shine on her head. That's just normal. All right. I'm not trying to remove it completely, right? I'm not trying to do this to her forehead. That's no good. All right. Sorry, Brooklyn. Didn't want to, not trying to do anything disrespectful. All right. What I'm trying to do here is just control that light. And this is part of portrait photography. You got to control light in post-production sometimes. If you get it right out of camera, then great. But I didn't have that opportunity at Imaging USA. I kind of had to go with what I had because it was a demo station. So it is what it is. But having tools like Luminar allows us to really make these edits the way that we need to. So the next thing I'm going to do is pull down on the highlights just a touch here. And I think that that's getting me about where I want to go. Now, what I'm noticing is I'm starting to lose some color in her forehead. And I think that that's okay because I am going to make a skin adjustment and I'm going to bring the saturation and vibrance into her skin. So I'm not going to overly concern myself with that, but pay attention that as you pull down exposure and highlights, you start to get this different discoloration in the skin. And that's very important because people don't want to have different colors in their skin when they see a picture of themselves. It's just not flattering, all right? Unless that's the look you're going for. But now that I have that, I'm going to close this, and it is now time to really start to work with her skin. So I'm going to grab another develop module or develop tool, and then I'm going to brush all over her skin. All right. And I'm going to do a pretty loose job just for tutorial purposes because I don't want this to be too much longer. I think it's already long as it is, but hopefully it's good information. And if you're finding value in this, man, smash that subscribe and like button. And, just hang out with your boy here on Free Will Photos because my goal is to bring you value and teach you techniques and things about editing photos. So that's what I do here. All right. If you got questions, you already know, drop them in the comment section. I do get back to my comments. And yeah, so there's a shameless plug, so to speak. So, and I'll even come down here on her neck. And like I said, I'm doing this fairly loose. Normally, I would take my time and be way more precise, especially if I was doing this for a client or for portfolio work. But for tutorial purposes and just showing and teaching concepts, all right? The reason I don't share my files is because I teach concepts here on this channel that you can go back and try on your own images. That's the goal, all right? That is my goal. Get you to try these things on your own images. All right, so now that I have my mask painted, I'm going to go ahead and come over to color, and I'm just going to push up on the saturation quite a bit. All right. I overdo the saturation originally just to see what areas of the skin I missed. And I can see that here between the separation of her eyebrow and her eyelid, I'm missing some skin. So now I'm going to come back to my mask, and this is a mask that you can re-edit. If you use the brush tool, you can always brush in more stuff. So with my paint or my brush on paint, I am just going to go ahead and paint this over this area. And now Luminar caught up with me. Okay, so I guess I didn't miss that area. Let's go brush, actions, and show. Let's see what we got here. Okay, so I guess I didn't miss the area. I probably need to work in this space here. So let's go ahead and just paint this area in. And we'll come down here. It's always good. Again, I don't want to be perfect, but I want to show the technique of how you can start to clean up your mask. So if you're like, okay, Chris, you said you did it quick and fast, but if I want to take my time, how do I go back and clean that up? So that's what I'm teaching right here. Is just how you can go back and clean up your mask. All right. So we're going to call that good, even though I probably could work on her eyelids a little bit more and even this side of her chin, neck, all that good stuff. But I'm not going to do that. All right. We're just going to hit this and we are going to turn off the mask and we're going to come back to adjustments. Now, I am going to pull up on the saturation a little bit more and I want to overdo it. Okay. Let's go ahead and zoom out. Okay. We'll let Luminar catch back up with us. There we go. All right. So if I turn this off and on, or I'm sorry, that's the overall, turn this off and on, I want to always take a look at where I'm coming from and where I'm going. Remember, I said saturation is not very forgiving as much as the vibrance slider is. So what we'll do is pull down on the saturation and I'm just eyeballing this. All right. There's, again, if you're doing this for a series of images, you want to make sure that you keep it consistent because you don't want the skin to look different in one image than it does in others. All right. So I'm going to just pull that down to about there. turn this off and turn it back on. And I think that this is getting to the overall saturation that I like. Now I like to play with the vibrance and see if I can just bring in a little bit of life to the overall image, to her skin. I mean, I'm sorry. So pulling up on this, and I think that that's looking good. All right. So this is the point where you'll probably hit the before and after, and you can see it's maybe a little too much. So I'll pull down on saturation because it's probably not the vibrance that's giving me that look. And I could sit here all day and nitpick this. Just make sure that whatever you choose to do for your image, it makes sense. Now, I'm going to hit the before and after. So this is what I came into Luminar editing with. And here is where I've gotten so far. It's like night and day difference. It was a great image out of camera, and all I'm doing is enhancing it here inside of Luminar. All right. So we're going to go ahead and close up this develop. And the last thing that I'm going to do with the develop tool is build the connection with her eyes. Portraits are very important to have a great connection with eyes. In fact, portraits are almost a throwaway if the eyes aren't in focus, and these eyes happen to be in focus, even though Luminar is not catching up with me, but it's okay. We're gonna roll with it. All right. So I'm gonna hit develop, and this one is really straightforward. You've seen me do this on plenty of photos. I'm just gonna zoom in here a touch. And I guess the eyes are maybe a little soft. So probably not the image that I should. Well, then they kind of sharpened up. I don't know. The eyes, I think they're sharp enough for what we're doing today. All right. But typically you want the eyes to be open a lot more than this, and you want them to be in focus. All right. I'm going to hit Command-0 to back out. We're going to come to our adjustments, hit light, and I like to add in exposure and clarity. Now, the challenge with Luminar is the clarity slider is not actually a part of this. So what I have to do is go with exposure. I'm going to increase my exposure just a touch there. And then I'm going to come over to my shadows and probably pull up on my shadows. I think that that's going to look pretty good. And I like to turn this off and on just to make sure that I'm not getting like alien eyes, because that's weird. All right. When the eyes are like super glowy, people's eyes don't look like that. All right. So don't do that. And I'm going to leave that adjustment as is. I think this is looking pretty good for what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to hit masking, go back here to the mask actions, and then I'm going to hit copy. Now, remember I said I like to add clarity to the eye. So now we're going to move to a different tool, because I showed you a bunch of tools here, or I'm sorry, I showed you only one tool, but that is like by far my most used tool inside of Luminar is that develop tool. The reason is because I'm always doing local adjustments. That's just personally how I edit. All right. But now we're going to come to structure AI. Now I used this earlier in the video, and just to add a little bit of structure and get rid of that develop raw. But now what I'm going to do is copy that mask for the eyes back into structure AI. So I'm going to hit here, and I'm going to click paste. All right. So if you didn't catch how I got there, if you're on the adjustments tab, you'll click the masking tab, come down to the bottom, click on mask actions, and then you'll click on paste. All right. This is going to put the mask that I had earlier into here. This is no different than copy and pasting in probably any other software. Now, all I'm going to do is crank up on the amount, and you don't need to overdo this. All right. In fact, overdoing it here doesn't seem to really eat up the image. So maybe it's okay for me to push this a little bit more. I'm not quite sure. Maybe Luminar didn't catch up because it doesn't seem to be doing anything right this second. So we'll leave that be. And in fact, I'm just going to push this. I normally keep it some like for eyes, I keep it somewhere between 10 and 20. All right. So 17, I think will work. I'm going to leave it just like that. All right. So that was Structure AI and Develop tool. Now, what else can you do inside of Luminar Neo? Well, when it comes to portraits, there's a ton of different things, and I'm not going to go over every single tool here, but they have a whole portrait section. Now, if you get this and it's not showing up, let me just minimize all of these little tabs because each of these tabs you can expand, right? So if I click on portrait, you can see I have all of my portrait tools, all right? So if you are, and this is kind of a power tip. If you are overwhelmed and you're like, I don't know where I want to go, and you just want to work on portraits, then this is probably a good place for you to be. Now, you've seen me use Studio Light in the past, and if you haven't, just check the description box below or the card up above, and I will share the video where I use Studio Light on a different model at the Build conference or Build Expo. But now what I want to do is use the Face AI. Now, she has great skin. All right. All right. So I had to go big screen for this one because I want to be very clear that when editing a portrait naturally, you want to make it look like the person. All right. We are not going to make plastic dolls in any of my tutorials. I don't do that. That's not my style. That's not how I like to represent people. All right. I'm not doing that airbrush type stuff. What we're going to do here with this image, and what I recommend everyone does with their images if they're using Luminar or any editing software, is that you take it realistic to the individual. If you go above and beyond to what the individual is, you're going to run into some issues. All right. That's just my personal preference. And I just want to give that disclaimer because sometimes we get sold on a product like, oh yeah, look, you could fix skin inside of this software. And then you put someone with some very tough skin to correct inside of the software. And it's like, well, look, you couldn't even handle this. Well, that is the character of that person's skin. And you just allow that to be what it is. All right. That person knows what they look like. And it's okay if they're not perfect. I'm not one of those people that are going to promote the porcelain look on a person because that's not cool. All right. Now, let's jump back into the computer. I just had to give that disclaimer because I do have a personal vendetta with that type of retouch. So here we are back inside the computer after my little disclaimer rant. And what we're going to do is really start to adjust the skin. All right. I'm not going to worry about the face light because I already adjusted the light the way that I wanted to adjust it on her skin on her face. But what I do want to do is kind of smooth her skin and remove a little bit of the shine from her skin. So I like to start with shine removal, and I just pull it up a little bit, stopping somewhere around 20 and just seeing what that does to my subject. All right. So turning it off and turning it on. It's very, very subtle. So I'll pull it up quite a bit just so that way we can see what it's doing overall. And you can see it's really reducing the highlight that's coming down here. Now, I kind of like that highlight because it gives a little bit of contour and definition to her face, but I'm actually a little okay with the way that this is going. So I'm going to leave that as such, and I'm going to pull up on the amount here. Now, when I pull up on the amount, I do this very slowly. Again, stopping before 20, and I stop, take a look, and I say, okay, I still see a little bit more pore in her skin than I would probably want to see, but I want it to look like skin. All right. Skin is not like perfectly smooth. It actually has pores to it. That's the way that skin is. So what I want to do is kind of just reduce that a little bit, but keeping it realistic. All right. Let me show you what you don't want. All right. Pull this all the way up, and you see her skin, it just doesn't look natural anymore. All right. Zooming in, it just doesn't look natural anymore. It looks very, very fake, very, very retouched, very Photoshop. And I think it's just a poor way of editing. So if this is how you edit, then okay, that's on you. But it just doesn't look real. It looks terrible. So, what I like to do is subtle adjustments and keeping the natural presence of the individual in all of my images. All right. Very rarely will you see me increase this beyond 40. All right. Very, very rarely. And the reason, once you hit, let's go 45. All right. Now, Brooklyn, like I said, she has great skin. It works out. She does great with taking care of her skin. Um, and you don't really need to do much of anything to make her skin look, just amazing on camera, right? However, what I don't want to do is make her not look like herself. All right. Now, with Brooklyn, 45 seems to work fine. And sometimes you just get in situations where you can do that. This is one of those rare cases where it works. But usually going above 40 is not recommended by me. All right. That's me speaking. That's not Luminar speaking. I'm just letting you know that I don't recommend going above 45 if you want that natural look. This is just my style. I'm teaching you my technique. All right. I'm going to drop it down to 30 because I like the natural look, and turn this off and on. This is very, very subtle, but I can see the difference in the overall image. And when you're working on your own photos, you'll be able to see the difference as well. So let's take a look at what we came into Luminar with, which is this particular image right here. And it is washed out. It doesn't look very good. And it needed some work compared to where we are now. And this is a much more vibrant and energetic image. I love where we are with it. Now, you could do some cool things. Let me see. I think it's actually under essentials. You could do a vignette. If you're into vignetting your images, you can choose the subject, and I would probably choose the eye closest to the camera. Click here, and then you can just pull down on the amount and start to build up a vignette. Now, one of the cool things about Luminar, the vignette tool actually has an inner light. And this is really helpful for making that vignette like separation. Like, I don't know if you could see, if I crank this up, you could see that it's, just brightening up this area. But I usually don't go too high on this. I find, again, under 20, between 10 and 20, that is like the best move or the best adjustment for my editing style. All right. And if I go before and after, you can really just see how that's working there. And you could work on the feather. So maybe you want it to feather a little bit more so it's more natural, whatever. I'm not going to get into the vignette tool. It's slider based, super forgiving, very, very easy to use. And that's the beauty of Luminar. Anything I did here, a beginner can pick up and start working inside of Luminar. I didn't do anything earth shattering or groundbreaking. The last thing that I'm going to showcase inside of Luminar, and then we will end this video, is the crop tool. Let's go ahead and hit crop AI. Now, or crop, and then there's composition AI. Now, composition AI is a subjective tool, all right? It doesn't always do the best composition, but what I enjoy doing with it is allowing Luminar to kind of think itself through, and it's going to take a little bit of time here, but eventually it's going to give me a composition. Now, this composition is non-destructive, so if I hit apply, it's going to give me that crop here in a little bit. And this works out really well for portraits, all right? Eventually, it's going to give me the crop. There it is. Now, I'm not a huge fan of what this did, all right? But what I can do is say, okay, you know what? I like that. Let me Why isn't this letting me? Oh, okay. It all right. So uh when you re when you come back to re-edit the crop, sometimes you have to let it load. It didn't have the rest of the image. And what it does is it gives me an aspect ratio, and then I can kind of reframe this the way that I think makes the most sense for the overall image, which is probably something like this. So I'll let my crop become the new standard. So we go from something like this to something like this. Again, what we came into Luminar with and what we are leaving Luminar with. So there's the final edit inside of Luminar Neo. Hopefully you found that value added. Now, if you want to pick up Luminar and save 30%, you have from now until February 15th, 2024 to use the link in the description box below to get the exclusive discount of 30% off when you check out. It is an affiliate link. I do make a small commission when you use it, but it's at no extra cost to you, so it's a win-win. And it's a great way to support this channel and keep content coming your way. If you got questions about Luminar, let me know in the comment section below, or you can shoot me an email and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions. So until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.